Hey everybody, great to see you. This is a study guide. The test will be open in CAS Learning on 4/23 and will close on 5/2. Topics to be included would be like Germany reunifying and glasnost, perestroika, the end of the Cold War, and the fall of the Soviet Union. So you may read an article about the cost of the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan. And the big cost was the Soviet Union's going to fall apart soon after the Russians leave Afghanistan in 1989. And a lot of people are going to say the Russian invasion of Afghanistan contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union just a few years later. Next, the Berlin Wall. Why would the Soviet Union put up the Berlin Wall? Simple. Germany started World War I, started World War II, and in both of those wars, the Soviet Union was almost destroyed, almost decimated. And the Soviets were like, we're not going to let there be a World War III. We're going to split Germany in half, and that's going to prevent them from trying to take over the world again. Now, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, he had a policy of perestroika. And perestroika was about restructuring the economy. The Soviet economy was in desperate need of a jump start. And Gorbachev's perestroika, he wanted to restructure the Soviet economy and allow a little bit of capitalism. Next, you may see a political cartoon with Gorbachev looking over a cracked, fragmented hammer and sickle, the Soviet Union symbol. And this is basically showing that the Soviet Union is deteriorating. The Soviet economy is deteriorating, and the republics of the Soviet Union are demanding independence. And in 1991, these Soviet republics would get independence as communism ends forever in the Soviet Union. What historical event is directly reflected in this passage? And you'll be reading a passage about a barrier being built between East and West Berlin. And basically it's going to say Berlin, there was a barrier that was put up, and it was going to be divided into an East and a West Germany. All right, so the barrier that's going to be known as the Berlin Wall. Now, one way Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping are similar is that they both incorporated capitalism ideas into their communist societies. And both of them realized that the communist governments needed a boost of capitalism to make them competitive. Now, chronological order. The first thing to happen was the adoption of the Marshall Plan to help rebuild Europe after World War II. Then the Cuban Missile Crisis happens when the Russians put nuclear missiles in Cuba. And then in 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. That would be the correct order. Mikhail Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping, they were both communist leaders, and they had similar changes they made in their countries. They both allowed elements of capitalism to try and boost the economy. You may also see a political cartoon where there are people breaking down a wall, and they are using a hammer and they are using a sickle to break down a wall. And this is basically showing Germans destroying the Berlin Wall, symbolizing the collapse of communism in Europe. And what fitting tools they're using than the hammer and the sickle of communism, representing communism destroying itself. The Great Wall of China and the Berlin Wall were both intended to limit the movement of people. That's what walls do. Two historic walls. Now, during the Cold War, what event occurred last? And if they have the Cuban Missile Crisis, the destruction of the Berlin Wall, the Berlin airlift, or the launch of Sputnik, we all know that the destruction of the Berlin Wall occurred last in 1989, and that was one of the final things before communism ends. Which leaders' policies include glasnost and perestroika? That would be Mikhail Gorbachev. He is the Soviet leader who had the policies of glasnost and perestroika. Now, another thing, what event in the Cold War occurred last? It's the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was in 89. That was the last event. The goal of Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of perestroika and glasnost. The goal of those policies were to stimulate economic growth and political discussion. Gorbachev, he contributes to the fall of communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe by introducing the policies of glasnost and perestroika. Those policies allowed people to have some elements of capitalism and criticize their government, which was huge. The destruction of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union signify the end of the Cold War, and the Cold War will finally end. You will be asked to look at a photograph of a man with an actual hammer and people standing around watching him destroy the Berlin Wall. And this was huge. This basically 1989 photograph symbolizes the end of the Cold War. And when the Berlin Wall fell, communism falls. One reason the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, what was the reason? Well, one of the reasons were to keep East Germans from fleeing to the west sector of Berlin. The people living in the east, the communist section, they would have just left. That's why the communists had to build a wall, because so many people were going to just walk away and leave the communist area because it was so poor. Next, what statement about reunification of East and West Germany in 1990 is accurate? Well, reunification occurs despite concerns by other European nations over the power of united Germany. And a lot of people in Europe were afraid to see Germany reunited. But in '89, it didn't matter. Germany is going to be reunited. And some countries are going to fear maybe a possible World War III in the future. During the 80s, Mikhail Gorbachev introduced perestroika in the Soviet Union to improve the economic and decentralized decision making. He wanted to improve the economic decisions in Russia. In perestroika in Russia, it's a Russian word that means restructuring. Okay, watch this a few times, take the test on CAS Learning. Good luck.